Excellent. We're live to the world, and good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, and wherever you might be listening to this live discussion today with a really good friend of mine. Actually, is Phil Young. I've actually known Phil for about 30 odd years, so since
Oh,
college days. So many years. That's a long time. It's probably showing our age a little bit now, but the reason I wanted to get Phil on board because I know he's got a very an eclectic background. He's got some really interesting and sort of diverse stuff that's been going on for many years. So Phil is he was a presenter on a TV show back in the noughties called Bored Stupid. You're a main presenter on that. It's all about snowboarding and anything to do with boards and skateboarding and that's. And you've had various other outdoor sort of activities that you've been working with. Now you're working primarily in sort of outdoor sort of activities, sporting, and you're film producing events. You're going to probably tell a little bit better than I've done as well. And Phil, whereabouts are you at the moment?
well, thanks for the intro, Jason, and thank you for welcoming me onto your discussion. Where am I? I'm in Southeast London, in West Dulwich. And I've been here for about 14 or 15 years, which was never really the intention, but it's that's where I'm living at the moment with my family, my growing family.
Your growing family, of course, and you've just gone into lockdown again, hasn't you? Just was it yesterday or the day before?
We're in, overnight we went into tier 3. I've got to be honest with you, I'm not entirely sure what that means anymore. Yeah. Where I'm living here in Southeast London, and I spent the first lockdown in Wales, which was wonderful because the weather was great. I was by the sea. I was by the hills, lots of green space, lots of opportunities to go running and cycling, mountain biking and road cycling. And my wife went swimming. But when I came back to London, probably in June, where I live, people I think have just given up on it anyway. It doesn't seem to be an awful lot different to what it is on a normal weekday. We live quite near the South Circular, which is, as you don't know, is one of the main roads that goes around London. And this morning, as I looked out of the window, that looked pretty busy. There's kids going to school, people going to work, the usual traffic jams. It didn't look as though much had changed. But, I think obviously people can't socialize in the same way as we did this time last year. And I know a lot of businesses are suffering because of that, especially the entertainment business, the restaurants and the pubs and those kind of things. So it's going to be an interesting Christmas for a lot of people. Yeah.
I think the Globe is going to be quite an interesting thing, really, this time out. Phil, tell me a little bit about your background, because you've got quite an interesting background. Start from because I know you've been into the sort of the skate scene for many years, and then the snowboarding scene, and now you're transformed into a runner. So, but you've been doing some wonderful events around that as well, global events. So I'm interested to find a bit more about that.
Well, I think at the front end of the conversation, you talked about a career, and that's never something I've knowingly had. I've ended up where I have done because I've never really wanted to have that traditional 9-to-5 job. That being said, I have had that. When I first left college, I went to college in Harlow in Essex, where I studied a sports foundation course. I'm not sure what good that did me, but it kept me off the streets. Kept me off the streets for a couple of years, and got me skateboarding and allowed me to do lots of sports. From there, I went into the city, and I worked for a life assurance company in the back office of the trading department. So just would settle shares, and I did that for a couple of years. It didn't really fit into my lifestyle. at all. I used to go to the office in a suit, but had my skateboard in a bag. And then after work, I'd nip down to the South Bank and go skateboarding there. From there, I kind of just floated around, went traveling with a skateboard, with a snowboard, just to kind of, I guess, defer actually having to do a job of sorts, because I didn't really know what work I wanted to do. I was never someone who would go to work because I think that's what you should do. I had the odd muck job here or there because you had to have money to be able to live and to be able to fund the lifestyle. But as far as taking on a career, there was nothing anything that really grabbed me. And I know that when I was at school, no one told me some of the things that were possible to do. So I kind of ended up making my career, if you're going to call that, for myself. I won't bore you with the story, but you may well be aware. I think we actually maybe even been sharing a property at the time, Jason. That I kind of gave it all up and decided that I was going to find my fortune. In America. So I quit the job that I had. I think I was doing something at the council. We had a goodbye party. I packed up my snowboard. I had a hookup somewhere in Utah. Someone I met at a snowboarding, a skateboard event, was the manager of a ski resort, I think called Donna Summit in Utah. And he said, "I'll come over and hang out for the season." So that was my plan, to go out to America and, just find out about myself and snowboarding and see where life took me. I got as far as Minneapolis airport, where I was kicked out. I didn't even make it. They turned me back. They said, "You're going to work here." I said, "No, I'm not." They said, "Yes, you are." Off you go. So I got back on the same plane that I arrived on, not even making it to my destination, just making it to a transit airport. So I got home with my kind of tail between my legs and I put my head down. It's like, well, I can't do this walk of shame back in town again. So I made a few calls and found out that some of my friends were doing a season in Chamonix, which is a resort in the French Alps underneath Mont Blanc. It's a beautiful place. So I thought, okay, has anyone got any space for me? I'll just go there instead. So I went out to Chamonix, met some people there, and decided I was taking photos. I took a lot of photos at the time, still do take a lot of photos, and I was writing. I've always been fairly able to put a few words down and make it relatively entertaining. So I was writing a little bit, taking photos. So concocted this plan to create a lifestyle magazine whilst we were there. We had no idea what we were doing, Jason, none whatsoever. But we were around some very creative people, artists, DJs, poets, athletes, graffiti artists, breakers, skateboarders, and thought, well, let's make a magazine about these people or people in this kind of culture. So we put something together. We actually ended up getting it distributed in Smiths and Menzies and those kind of places, which is remarkable because we had no idea what we were doing. But it got out. We didn't make any money out of it, of course, but it did give us the opportunity to go onto lots of trips. People would take us onto press trips and give us lots of free things, and it's really quite exciting.
Could you fast forward and tell us the points that you got from there, and then you did the presenting? So that's. I'm
about to do that. I'm about to do that. Yeah. Let me tell my story. So we had this magazine. We had this magazine, Storm, it was called, I think. And on the television, on Channel 4, we heard that they were going to do a TV show about snowboarding. Channel 4 TV show about snowboarding. We had this magazine, and we thought, okay, look, here's a great opportunity to do some PR. We'll get this magazine into the hands of the producers for this TV show. And well, I don't think we knew what the end would be. We just thought, let's just give it to them and see what happens. So we went in there, found the production company, went in there, gave them the magazine. We got chatting, and they said, "What are you doing on Wednesday?" And I said, "Nothing. I think I was claiming the dole, as well as doing this magazine." And they said, "Oh, do you want to interview a couple of people? We've got a couple of people that we've identified. We'd like to interview them. Would you like to interview them?" I said, "Who are they?" And they gave me the names. Like, yeah, I know them. I've just been in France with them for the last 6 months. So yeah, that's an easy one for me. So I went into town, interviewed these guys, and they said, "Oh, do you want to come to Switzerland next week? Are you doing anything?" I said, "No, I'd love to come to Switzerland." I went to Switzerland not really knowing why, but it transpired that I was then the co-presenter of this TV show. And it all kind of happened. I drove up there with now a very good friend of mine who was the assistant producer. It's his first job, and I just somehow then I'd been given this job as the co-presenter of this TV show, as you rightly said, bored stupid. Yeah. On the second year, on the second season, because it got recommissioned. I think we got four seasons out of it. On the second season, the main presenter, who was for those of a certain age will recognize the name, a guy called Normski. Normski had left the show. He's another good friend of mine. He'd left the show, so I was by default the presenter of this TV show. None of my choosing or doing, but I really quite enjoyed it. As you would, traveling to various different parts of the world, to Alaska, to Canada, to various different parts of Europe, presenting snowboarding, something that I love then, and I love to this day. Off the back of that, that opened a few doors to me. Off the back of that, I started getting some voiceover work, and some of the voiceover work I was doing were for brands that were looking to market their product around action sports, or extreme sports as they were called at the day. And those brands were putting on events, creating ads, doing editorials. And I would meet these people when I was doing the voiceovers. Before and after I'd go into the booth. And I got chatting to some of the marketing directors or brand managers, and just saying, well, there are better ways of doing it than the way you're doing it. You've got the great intentions, and it's fantastic that you're actually trying to leverage your brand within this very exciting and energetic culture. But yet you're slipping, you're messing up, because this culture is not identifying with the language or the way that you're talking, which is fine if you want to do that, but I can tell you a way, and I can show you a way that you can get a lot more return on your investment within this market, and you can actually make a real difference, not just to your product, but to the culture,
the brands and the audience,
the culture that you're working with. Let's everyone understands that relationship. The brand is exploiting a culture,
of course,
but for that to work well, that culture has to get something out the back of it. There needs to be a trade-off, otherwise it's going to fall flat on its face. And if you look at something like skateboarding or snowboarding or surfing or mountain biking, or these kind of sports where people are putting their life on the line when they're doing it.
They are,
so
absolutely.
If you're going skateboarding, something as innocuous as skateboarding, which you think, oh yeah, we all know what skateboarding is. You go on Thrasher magazine on their Instagram and tell me that you think that that's skateboarding. These are people who are going over huge gaps, jumping down like massive flights of stairs backwards, the board's flipping underneath them, and then they're trying to land on it. They're hurting themselves a lot. So the career span of a top professional skateboarder or snowboarder is quite slim, and only a few of them really make it up to the top. So if you're going to market your brand, you've got to give these people some respect and don't cheapen what they're doing.
Yeah.
But if you're going to be in this game, you can help them do what they're doing, and you can really show ways in which you can enhance their experience.
And I put your website just down there, just so people can actually see exactly what you do today, and how you sort of help exciting events. Obviously, the events this year has probably dried up a little bit, as we know.
Yeah, pretty zero, I think, on the event side of things. We had three or four fairly high profile activations that we were looking at doing this year, which have all fallen by the wayside.
Yeah. And I did see last year you did the World Trail Running event. I'm not sure the exact. It was down in South America somewhere. I seem to remember.
No, UTMB, Ultra Trail Mont Blanc.
That's it.
That's bizarrely, that was in Chamonix as well. A place that I love going to, but actually had never been to Chamonix out of the winter season, and it's actually more beautiful in the summer than it is in winter, if you can believe that. It's set the base of Mont Blanc, and actually, to be honest, that was a fairly seminal moment in my life, that trip. And it was for an outdoor brand called Columbia. It's an American brand, but it's an outdoor clothing brand called Columbia, and they put on this, or they sponsor an event called the UTMB, Ultra Trail Mont Blanc, the blue ribbon event of which is a 100-mile trail running race around Mont Blanc. So it starts in Chamonix, goes around into Italy, up through Courmayeur, over an Alp or a saddle in an Alp, into Switzerland, and back into Chamonix. I mean, it's fairly brutal.
It's not for the faint-hearted. I've done 20 miles, but not 100 miles. That's a little bit.
This is 100 miles, but it's over the Alps as well. So there's an awful lot of vertical ascent. I think it's like 10,000 meters vertical, which is higher than Everest. And the most brutal part of this, Jason, is that there is a time limit on it. Is that I think 3,000 people start, but only less than 1,000 are likely to finish, and the time limit, I think, is 43 hours or something, 43 and a half hours. And if you don't make it back in 43 and a half hours, your bib gets taken away from you.
Oh, yeah, that's pretty drastic.
Oh, absolutely. And these are people who are running. If you're at the end of the field, you're running overnight twice through the Alps by yourself. So you're facing some demons. But the thing that really struck me on this, and this is kind of where my life is heading at the moment, is that we know that if we're looking at long distance runners, the by far the best long distance runners in the world are the East Africans, the Kenyans, the Ethiopians, Ugandans. I saw one black person running in this UTMB, and there was in this race there was 3,000 people.
Wow!
This is one race, but over the week there's several races. But in the whole of the time that I was there, I saw one black runner, and it made me think, well, why is that? And I've always known, I've obviously as a black man who works in snowboarding and in cycling and mountain biking and now trail running and surfing, I don't see an awful lot of people who look like me. Don't see it, And I've always kind of felt a little bit out of place working in this environment, but I love it, and to that end, it's never really stopped me from partaking and participating in it. Bearing in mind, to give it some context, I've been very fortunate by being brought up by a white grandparent, who allowed me and gave me the keys to do any of these sports that I wanted to do. If I showed an interest in any sport, he would go, right, let's take Phil to try and do that. I went skiing for the first time as a 10-year-old. I learned to play in the waves as like a 6-year-old down in the south coast of Wales. I travelled fairly extensively as a child, so I was given the access and experience that maybe other people are not fortunate enough to receive. So I feel very blessed in that. But one of, I guess, the problem that I was trying to uncover, or the issues that I'm trying to uncover is why are people of color not taking part in some of these sports, and what are the barriers, the invisible barriers an awful lot of the time, and what is the history?
What have you found out about this? Because it's like that we all know now it's big into the press, and big businesses are thinking about it. Some of them, the Googles of the world, are actually hopefully doing something about it. But from your point of view, what do you think is the steps that people can actually use diversity, inclusion, and equity in a sort of a fundamental way for sports and for trail running and all the other areas that we spoke of, but also business as well?
Let's put it into context for a moment. Okay, so I identify as a black man, right? Ask ourselves, why am I here? Why am I in the UK? Why am I living in London as a black man? You know, because black people live in Africa, right? It's where black people come from, live in Africa. So the reason black and brown people are in the UK is because white people were in Asia and Africa. That's the reason. You know, my ancestors are former slaves. They're my forefathers were former slaves who were taken from Africa, who were bound in chains and who were made to work in appalling conditions, treated as nothing more than commodities, to work the fields for probably sugar, but for the British, however many years ago, 200, 300 years ago, so that Britain can get very wealthy, so that it would have the money to create the Industrial Revolution. Right? The only reason we're here, a lot of us are here, is because after the war, when the UK needed to be rebuilt, people from the colonies, the Commonwealth, people who were British citizens, because they were under British rule, were invited over to come and build the country, come and rebuild the country. Right? They were promised all sorts of stuff: great jobs, great housing. Streets are paved with gold, that they could send money back to their families. We all know that the reality was something totally different from that. There was no race legislation that meant that you had to give the job to the person who was qualified, or you had to give housing or mortgage to people if they had the money. You could just say no to that. I mean, I'm sure your viewers will recognize the no dogs, no blacks, no Irish sign that used to appear. Is that if you were black, you couldn't go into a building, you couldn't rent a property, you couldn't get a job, you couldn't you couldn't be lent money for a mortgage. To that end, communities, black communities and brown communities as well, South Asians, were forced to live in substandard housing, generally in inner cities. So what we're dealing with is communities who are living in Brixton, in Notting Hill, in Harringay, places like that, and in various other cities across the country, but in small communities, generally in inner cities, and generally in housing that was destined, a slum, to be knocked down, to be created into something else. Right? And let's remember as well that Black people, if you go to the Caribbean, you go to Africa, it's outdoor living. It's outdoor living. So we are engaged with nature. When you're in the inner city,
it's not,
and you're not engaged with nature. And we all know that our culture in here, in this country, can be racist. There's countless examples of racism out on the street, in shops, in restaurants, in the workplace, in government, in institutions. And we hear every day of various different instances of that. So the thinking goes, right, if it is racist in London, and in London the population is 43, I think the last census, 43% BAME, that's Black, Asian, minority ethnic, 43%. So over 3 million people in London who identify as non-white, non-Indigenous white. And it's still racist. If it's racist here, what's it going to be like in the countryside? That's the thinking, right? It might not necessarily be true, but that's the thinking. And if your grandfather,
I was going to say, go on. I was going to say, how do we put this into the sports analogy that you said, just so we can fast forward it a little bit, and in the business context that we suggested when we spoke before?
Okay, so there's two things there. In the sports, in regards to the sports question, if you look at the sports that people of color do, they're generally sports that you can do in the city. So we're very good at track and field. 100 meters. You can get 100 meters in London. You can do that. Most schools have got 100 meters. You can play football. You can do that. When it comes to any of those sports that really you need space, or you need to be outside the city, we don't perform at all. Because we have lost that emotional connection to being outside of the city. Because our parents or our grandparents have not gone to the city. So they when they came to the UK, they weren't saying let's go on a camping trip. They weren't saying let's go for walks down by the seaside. They were like, let's look after our community. Let's make sure we're safe. And they built their culture around elements that they are able to control, which is concrete and steel and tarmac. Not around country living. So we've lost that. We've lost that connection. No, so in regards to snowboarding and surfing and sailing and horse riding, of course we aren't represented in those fields because we have no understanding of what it's like outside the city. Because we haven't been welcomed outside the city. That's for sure. So that's in regards to sports. That's the main issue. In regards to business, I think probably the biggest issue we have is one of education. Is one of understanding who people of color are and what their role is in history, why they're here, how they're treated, and some of the issues they have to face on a daily basis. We know unconscious bias. That's a term that's been repeated lots and lots over the last few months. If you know that if someone who turns up to an interview who has their hair in a slightly,
make that assumption that they're that type of person or whatever else,
because they don't look like you. Because they don't look like you, and humans are generally drawn to people they feel comfortable around. That's not to say that person isn't supremely qualified for that role, You know, they could be much better than their white counterpart, but because they have a foreign sounding name, because they have their hair in a different hairstyle, because their nails are painted in a different way, they're like, oh, they're not our people. They you know, they won't be able to do the job. Bearing in mind that who is it that says what is right and what is wrong as far as the way you can express yourself?
So, question for you then, Phil, is how do we tackle that? I know a lot of the tech companies are sort of tackling that, hopefully in an unbiased way, and I'm actually assuming that the LinkedIns of the world and the Googles of the world and all of that are starting to blend that in, and they have done for a few years. But what about all the other companies out there? How do you see that working?
Well, it's first of all, it's an acknowledgement that maybe what they have done needs to be addressed. Now, if you look at business, look, I'm not a businessman really. I mean, I run a business, but I'm not one of these entrepreneurs that like, okay, where's the money come? You know, this is how you run a business. But from my understanding, you know, if you've got a structure in a business, your number one thing is to protect the integrity of that business, right? You want to protect it. You want to make sure that any outside forces that are going to impact on it, you are able to push them away, right? But to be able to address this issue of inclusion and diversity, you have to start dismantling some of that armor to say, actually, this is we're not where we can be doing things in a different way. Now, if we're talking about diversity and inclusion, people look at it and say, well, why do we have to have diversity and inclusion? Is it A, the law? Is it B, the moral thing to do? Or is it C, because we can earn more money? Now, you'd think that most people would go, well, it's the moral thing to do, right? Just because they've got a slight accent and their skin is a different color, if they're good enough to do the job, why shouldn't we have them in the job, right? The other one, you know, clearly there's a market out there. If we look at the sports market, which is, you know, the area that I work in, if we look at London alone, and we've got 3 million people from the BAME community who aren't interested in looking at any kind of sports that are outdoors, like outdoor sports, that's 3 million people in London alone that you're not talking to.
Massive opportunity there.
Unfortunately, some of the people, some businesses are looking at the first option is like, oh, it's the law, we should do it, which is totally the wrong way round. You know, there's a huge opportunity here, and there's a huge wealth of creativity and a different way of thinking.
But this goes beyond England. It goes beyond goes across the whole of Europe as well, and obviously in the States as well. I think that's probably slightly different, but I think across Europe, because it's been here for hundreds and hundreds of years, I think that now there's a massive opportunity here that is which, from what you're doing now with the mighty.com, is you're helping the brands reach that target market, which I think is a phenomenal effort to do.
So what we're trying to do at the moment is, you know, we're working with two or three brands really in the outdoor sector who are waking up to this fact, and they're fairly big brands, right? They're household names who, prior to lockdown, I was speaking to and saying, hey, look, where I'm looking on your website, I don't see anybody of color being represented here. The only time I see an image on your social feed of a black person wearing an outdoor jacket, they're standing like this in front of some graffiti art outside a council flat.
Bit cliche now.
You know, are you saying that we can only wear this jacket in the city, or can we, and that we can't wear it on the mountain because that's for other people. Is that seriously what you're saying?
Yeah.
And the response that I would get back is, oh yeah, right. Well, yeah, we treat this seriously, and we're looking at working our way through this, and give us time. And then COVID happened, and then George Floyd was killed in front of everybody.
That's right, yeah.
for 8.5 minutes on everyone's devices. And everyone's had an opportunity, I think, to reflect on the fragility of life and actually what is morally right. And people are starting to wake up to the fact. And I think that the Black and brown community have said, you know what, we've had enough anyway.
Yeah.
We're not letting you off the hook anymore. We can't. But look, there are, in Africa alone, there are 54 different countries. 54 different countries in Africa. Across the world, there's probably got to be close to 100 countries where Black people or people of color are the majority. Right? But yet we are painted as just Black people. You don't say that when you talk about Europe, you don't talk about, all the white people in Europe. You talk about the Germans and the French and the Italians and the Greeks and the Portuguese, because they're all different cultures. And within that, you've got more separate cultures. But as Black people, we are treated as just, it's Black people.
Yeah.
And I think people are having to start to realize that, well, hang on a minute, there is more than just a color here. There's lots of different people who can contribute huge amounts. And in any business, why would you want, and I'd love someone to answer this to me, why would you want to have a lot of people with exactly the same voice and exactly the same ideas, with exactly the same upbringing, rather than have a diversity of people, or a diverse amount of people who have got new ideas, who come from different backgrounds, who've got different ways of looking at things, different ways of tackling problems, and different ways of coming up with new solutions. I mean, it just makes, in my head anyway, like I say, what do I know? But in my head, it makes total sense to have new voices involved. So for businesses not to actually try and embrace this opportunity to bring new voices and new ideas into their fold seems really rather bizarre.
Look, that's probably a good thing to finish up on. Like, I think this conversation probably can go bigger and bigger. But based on the last thing that you said, if anyone's affected by this right now and they want to find out more from Phil on his point of view, or big businesses out there want to find out more about this conversation, like this, I'll upload this to YouTube anyway, and I'll share it among everyone. Phil, really thank you so much for your time and effort. It's been a bit of a journey, a bit of a roller coaster journey all the way through. And it's it really has hit on a few touch points along the way. So that is absolutely excellent. And I'm glad I brought you on, because it was definitely worth bringing you aboard on what we spoke about today. So that's excellent. So thank you once again.
Thank you for having me, Jason. And thank you anyone for listening.
All right. Cheers. Bye-bye.